Hello! Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. Today's review will be about An Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon. There are about a dozen different reasons that this is an unusual book for my reading material. It features a black, neurodivergent, gender nonconforming lead. It's sci-fi, and for my bookcase at least, it's rather hard sci-fi. It's an emotional read, and it's dark as hell. It's got a strong voice, and it's not really subtle about its themes and its historical references. And it's a really good book. An Unkindness of Ghosts is the story of Aster, a woman living on a ship that is traveling through the cosmos in search of a new planet for humanity to settle on. The ship, the Matilda, is an ark of sorts, carrying what is implied to be some of the Earth's last survivors. It's never defined, but something happened on Earth, something cataclysmic, and it made the planet uninhabitable. So a certain number of people got on this ship and fled. But this ark has devolved into something very like the antebellum South. People are divided by which deck they live on. The wealthy, powerful upper classes live in the upper alphabet decks, deck 1, A, B, C, D, etc. The middle classes live on the middle decks, like L, M, N, O, but the people on the lower decks are the poor and the powerless. They are forced to work in shifts in the fields that they grow the crops in under an artificial sun. They are not allowed anywhere but their own decks without a pass written by a powerful member of the upper classes. And honestly, let's be clear here, they're slaves. And who are the people who happen to be the ones on the lower decks? People with dark skin. They are mistreated, beaten, dehumanized, abused, and told that it's what God requires. They are told that to keep the Matilda safe and operational, it is their duty to work obediently and accept whatever punishments the guards deem fit. Humanity has been traveling on the Matilda for 300 years. New religions, languages, and ways of life have developed, often specific to certain decks. And all of the structures set up are inhumanely unfair to the people of the lower decks. Aster, our hero, is mistreated and dehumanized even worse than most of the lower deck citizens because she is different. She is neurodivergent, an orphan, queer, female, and not traditionally feminine. And also, she's insanely smart. She has drawn the attention of powerful men, partially by educating herself, but also by becoming a physician and working with the Surgeon General, who is a very important figure and a beloved figure in this government. But Aster and Giselle, her best friend, are obsessed with the journals that Aster's long-dead mother left behind, and the secret that may be hidden within their pages. A secret about Aster's mother's death, about her work in life, and possibly a secret that could finally end the awful and oppressive regime on the Matilda. So this is an interesting book. I'd even say a fascinating read, and largely enjoyable. But I feel it would be untruthful to say that I always loved reading it. I'm really happy to have read it, but one of the things I love about speculative fiction, both sci-fi and fantasy, is it allows us to look at the ills of our society at a distance. We can look through the lens of metaphor and allegory to examine what is too hard, too exhausting, or just too painful to look at directly. This book is a bit like wearing sunglasses to stare directly at the sun. It has a lot of violent, uncomfortable scenes. Now, they don't feel gratuitous or inauthentic. They belong in the book, and honestly, if you were to cut them, the book would be lesser because of doing so. But some of them are hard to read. And I don't think that's a bad thing either. Books shouldn't always be super easy to read, especially when they tackle really tough and uncomfortable topics like racism and slavery. But yeah, serious warning here. This book does include scenes of assault, rape, violent murder, and torture. Not all of it is on the page, but a lot of it is. Hell, the first scene in the book is Aster amputating a child's foot because of frostbite brought on by the government rationing heat in the lower decks to save power. So be prepared for some tough scenes. But one of the things I want to talk about here is futurism. Sci-fi almost always looks at our future. It predicts what could happen. And this book certainly does. But I'm not really sure how I feel about this book's predictions. Like, Earth suffering a great cataclysm that forces humanity to flee? Sadly, yeah, that seems pretty likely. But, by God, I hope we don't devolve back to chattel slavery. I know that we never managed to fully abolish slavery, no matter what we tend to pretend, but I really do think we wouldn't just devolve that far. Or maybe we would. I don't know. It's really easy to forget that the era of plantations powered by slavery in the US wasn't even 200 years ago. And if you count prison labor, it's still happening. But to be honest, I just like my visions of the future slightly more hopeful. So personally, I found myself divorcing the book from the concept that this is where humanity could go, and instead just thinking of it in terms of the past. Because whether it could happen again or not, it has happened. A lot of this book reads like a window into the life of a person living under the horrors of slavery, just in space. But I also don't want to reduce this book to just slavery in space. Solomon did some really interesting, lively, and creative world building. The cultures of the different decks are fascinating, with a through line that allows us to see how they are related and how they've evolved. There are little tidbits about the different decks that I absolutely love. Like the fact that children on the T deck are referred to as they until they reached adulthood, whereas on the Q deck they're referred to as she until they reach adulthood. There were interesting legends and myths and stories all throughout the book that connect the different decks together, and these stories and legends feel like direct descendants of folklore and stories that are part of our world and our past. It gave the book a certain depth and humanity that felt like a real living culture. The characters were also really fascinating. Aster, of course, is a wonderful POV character. Her inner monologue did not read like most heroes. I am an outsider here. I don't share Aster's particular kind of neurodivergence, but it felt like the way someone with an atypical way of seeing the world would narrate a story. Also, unlike a lot of leads, Aster is incredibly capable. Like, a lot of books, and yeah, I know, I recognize that a lot of the reason I expect this is because I read a lot of children's books, but a lot of books I sort of expect the main character to be finding their way in the world, to be trying to figure out how to do whatever the action of the book is. And Aster knows how to do the action of the book. She understands science. She understands how to work around the system that she lives in. What she doesn't understand is how to interact with people. So we get to see a lot more of her struggling to figure out basic human interaction than her struggling to figure out how to, you know, overthrow the government. She seems to have a handle on that. And Aster is not our only POV character. We get short bits in Giselle, Aster's best friend's point of view, Melisande, her aunt and adopted mother's point of view, and Theo's point of view, the actual Surgeon General, as well. And they all stood out. They each have strong, atypical voices, which allowed me to get to know the characters in a surprisingly short amount of time. And none of these characters are the kind of characters you read a lot about in books, but it didn't feel like the author was going, oh, how can I make this character different? Each character is just interesting in her own, or their own right. Giselle is mentally unstable, Melisande is probably asexual, and Theo is... He's also sort of gender non-conforming, though less so than Aster. Aster at one point in the book actually starts dressing up and presenting herself as male, though I think she actually says at one point she does not see herself as male, but she enjoys presenting as male in those times. Theo does not do that, but he's referred to repeatedly throughout the book as feminine, not masculine, not matching what people expect to see in a man. So each character is super interesting in their own right. And each character sounds completely different from all the others. But it felt like a lot more fit in this book than the page count could allow. And part of that was because it has really odd pacing. There are a lot of jumps and a lot of summarizing bits that would have usually been written out. I think much of that can be attributed to the fact that our main POV character was someone who didn't always focus on what most people would. And this allows the author to move through the story at a pretty quick clip, which leaves more time for world and character building. There was one point that I felt the pacing did not quite work. We skipped a scene where Aster tracked someone down and convinced them to tell her some secrets, and that both sounds like an interesting scene, but also more importantly, I'm not sure how she did it, and so skipping it felt like I missed something. But other than that, I would say the book did cover what it needed to, and didn't waste time on the connective tissue that usually is necessary to hold a book together, and yet it was held together. Also, this is the rare book that literally warns you when the climax is about to start. And even more strange, I think the warning comes in the wrong place. But overall, I wasn't bothered by the weird pacing. This is a great book. Just make sure that you're not feeling emotionally fragile when you pick it up.